the November session of the AI and EdTech Mastermind for charter schools. As I said, I've been off in busy conference land and only had a couple chances to send out some emails. And then I just saw Jeff Rice at A Plus, who usually gets this out there, and he had just come back from vacation. So I know he wasn't able to get it out. That's okay because I'm mainly using this opportunity here today to download a bunch of thought architecture I've been working on and developing, and then show off a new platform that I have in fact been vibe coding. And so Javi and Johnny and I, before that started recording here, we're just getting into talking about what is vibe coding, what are AI agents, and with Noah from Scout SIS, I think we're going to be talking about that maybe sometime in December for a session. And what are those thresholds of like what's an LLM? What does an agent mean? What is a potential definition for super intelligence and AGI and so on and so that might be interesting to put into these ideas at some point. But for now, I want to cover two main things. I'm gonna cover this thought architecture I'm describing that I refer to as arc and fork. That's kind of a positioning and call it in time and space and looking at bigger forces and how they act on us all the way down to our present moment. And the reason I find that so valuable is kind of just like if you were like anytime that you pull up a GPS or directions, what's necessary? It's got to say, well, where are you right now? Okay, you want to get somewhere new. It's an impossibility if you don't have an accurate starting place. So if I, for example, want to go to Bangkok in Thailand, I have to start like here in Grass Valley, California. If I put my if I imagine my position to be any place other than that, then the directions are going to be off. I'm just not going to have a clear route. So maybe that would be the easiest orientation. And I'm going to show COMPART, which I'll introduce as like part of my big idea or solution of what's unlocked and what is like what's needed and some tech that can fit the what I'll call the decentralized world that is rapidly expanding now. So let me go ahead and share screen here. And we'll start first with my calendar about this. Okay. So this is the most recent iteration of this done at Rapsa. And I'm not sure I'm gonna go through the full slideshow, but I'll go through all the slides that are kind of interest. And as I told my the people in this session at Rapsa, I said, first off, this title is kind of a trick. This is not exactly what we're going to be getting into, but it aligns with some of their interests there. Secondly, this session is not going to be like any of the other sessions that you've attended at this conference. And thirdly, it's probably not like any session you've attended ever. And so I was like, all right, and if that all sounds good and interesting to you, then go ahead and stick around and we'll get into it. So this is the biggest operating architecture I start with. And it's largely just because of things that I was exposed to when I was younger. When I was uh, in high school, I got an opportunity to go with the American Field Service as a foreign exchange student, and I lived in Argentina for my junior year. So I was there for like 13 months. And I came back for my senior year of high school back in my small town, and I had kind of the feeling of like, okay, what else can you show me? So I was very hungry for like uh, bigger experiences again. And it just so happened that, in that particular opening of youth, whatever we encounter at that age, I think we can go really all in on. And it's to me then like a real tragedy when somebody, for whatever reason, has obstacles that would cause them to avoid life at that age because that age is so potent for really sinking your teeth into something as long as there's not something blocking that happening. And for me, I encountered two books at that time that were like magnetic for me and had a big overall effect on my priorities and my worldview. One was The Secret Life of Plants, which was a study of plant. It was a compilation of a bunch of studies on plant consciousness that really kind of blew me away. And then Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, who was a yogi who came over um, earlier in the 1900s from India and brought the Kriya Yoga science to the United States and built actually some substantial organizations around that. Still one of the like best-selling books and consistently ranked in the top books that change people's like worldview or perspective after reading it. And it certainly had that effect on me. But The Secret Life of Plants took me down the Ayurveda path, which is a holistic healthcare that comes out of India, and it's an actual medical profession in India, whereas in the United States here it's treated as a vocation. But the underpinnings of both yoga and Ayurveda are Sankhya philosophy. So this Vedic philosophy called Sankhya, it kind of translates as the enumeration of the universe. And the reason I include it here is because like underlying everything I'm doing is that there's also like a vertical life. There's not just a horizontal life, but there's also a vertical life. And an understanding that things descend from subtle to gross, from a very fine united place to a coarse many, many, many in realities, maybe endless in that sense. Um, and and that's different than what like a materialist perspective where you would kind of have to relate to consciousness as like an emergence of like a magic trick that came out of matter or something like that. So I see it in the other direction, and that's in line with the great sage Kapila and all the rest that came after that. And I think that it's such a fundamental understanding. It really has no conflict with any of the major world religions. They could all basically nest within this understanding. It's sort of this is like pre-religion. So whatever religious stories would be added on top of this would all be like compatible. So then one of these sages, actually Yogananda's guru, Sri Yukteswar, who was a real Jnanavatar, like a incarnation of wisdom, and he took these particular calculations from the yugas on what are, or from the Vedas, which are called the yugas. There are these big cycles of time, sort of 24,000 year period cycles. And he describes how the the ancient sages, these rishis, had an understanding of cosmology. And to my knowledge, this is yet to be shown in modern astronomy. But because I give validity to realized saints and sages, then I incorporate this into my worldview as well. And it's the idea that our sun has a dual in the galaxy. And we're obviously we're a part of the Milky Way galaxy, and the concentration of that Milky Way galaxy is dense stars and light. And if you've ever, if you've seen the picture, it's like this spiraling galaxy. And so spiraling out from that, we have our sun, which is 99.8% of our solar system's mass. In other words, all of it. We're like a footnote on it. We're like miscellaneous. And um, and that sun has a dual in the galaxy, and they orbit around each other in these large cycles that take about 24,000 years, according to their calculations. Now, so in that movement, our sun and therefore our Earth and us going all along for the ride get closer to or farther away from a galactic center. And it's described that as we're moving closer to that, that's this ascending arc, 12,000 years ascending, and then a descending arc, 12,000 years descending. And that the energy from that concentration of stars, in fact, they referred to it again, that they even knew that we were part of a Milky Way galaxy, writing these things thousands of years ago. And that beyond that their perception of it was that this was not just emanating starlight, but also energy that affected human consciousness en masse, like the whole human experiment. Fascinating to me. And so he calculated that we are in this ascending arc, but that we had just moved out of the Kali, the darkest like material age, into the Dwapara Yuga shortly after 1700 AD. And he says like one of the big markers of that was the discovery of the atom, which is also written about in Vedic texts and in Sankhya philosophy, described as the Anu, the smallest building block of the illusion of separateness, which is wild. And sure enough, as we peer into the atom, we find out like, oh, well, it takes us into this realm of quantum, and it really messes with our whole concept of material reality anyway. So this description is that we're moving from this material age that was a 1200-year period, the ascending arc of Kali, into a 2400-year ascending Dwapara Yuga. And that the main effect that that has on our consciousness is that we shift from viewing things primarily materially to viewing them more electrical through an electrical consciousness. So obviously our explosion in the technology arc fits very much in line with that idea. And you know, and he was writing these things in the 1800s, so it was before he had you know, he wasn't here for this AI thing, but one could argue that he could see this unfolding to some degree. So very, very interesting. Now, these other higher yugas would be whole other discussions, but just within the 2400-year period that we are in right now, that's a big enough cycle and a big enough energetic force to kind of nest in as our biggest cyclical force that affects us. Next would be Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio looks at empire cycles. And empire cycles, of course, can be hundreds of years. So much smaller than a 1,000-year period or a 2400-year and so on, but still substantial cycles. And you've got empires like ours that are young, that were born in the 1700s and that had a peak around World War II and then have been kind of trailing, according to his measurements, down into the right since then. So he looks at 8 different variables and shows how empires consistently rise on education and innovation. They peak on trade and currency dominance, and they decline through debt division and rigidity. So if you look to the places in the world, now if you look at like the China's has been more of like a sine wave because China is not just a rising empire, it's more of a reascending empire. It's been around for a long time, and that's how they see it and view it internally as well. And so it had a previous peak, and then it came down to a trough, and then it has been like sort of parabolically moving up and has really crossed over the American empire in most domains. So it puts us in a period that Dalio refers to as a changing world order. We're moving from a unipolar moment to a multipolar world. And we can see all of the signs of the decline, that the peak happened on trade and currency dominance. And now we're in the midst of decline through debt division and rigidity. And I think there'd be very few Americans that could, argue with that sort of mass experience. So Dalio brings us to sort of hundreds of years period here. And again, he looked at all these different empires and was able to see this common arc formation. So that places us in an interesting time here and that sort of global tumult and reshifting that we are feeling and experiencing. Then we have our more local Anglo-American history that's been tracked since the late 1400s, using the fourth turning, which is a theory of generational cycles in, let's call it, the West. And what this looks at is that every 80 to 100 years, roughly every generation, there's this dismantling and rebuilding of core institutions. And so we're currently in one of those winter crisis phases right now. But every generation has like a spring, a summer, an autumn, and a winter to it. We just happen to be in the winter phase now, and it is set to resolve sometime around the 2030s. But that again can give us a sense that, okay, we're nested in, again, this other more local cycle, but still substantial, 80 to 100 years. This is something that has a big impact on each person's life in terms of where the bulk of their life is being lived in this. And we're in this one right now. And so that means that we should expect ideologies in America to continue to be at each other's throat and really battling it out. And there will come again a springtime. There will be an end to this winter, and there will be like a rebuilding, and our institutions will look different again on the other side of this. So this one I like just because this is oriented till this is kind of a this too shall pass orientation, and knowing that that these cycles are happening though. And it's not, you're not coming back to the same place in every rotation. It's more of a, a helix or like a corkscrew. It's transforming, but it's also these cycles are continuing to play out. So then what's the fork that we're at in the fork ahead? Um, we looked at you know, this Chinese epic, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, has a great quote: "The empire long divided must unite. The empire long united must divide. Thus has it always been." And in tech, we'll sometimes say like innovation is oftentimes a package, a process of unbundling and rebundling. So bundling, unbundling, and rebundling. So so empires do this, but then technology and innovation does this as well, where you start with like a song that got bundled up into say records, and then um, and CDs and whatever else. It got unbundled again in the era of like MP3s, and then it's got rebundled into like a Spotify playlist. So here's this little image here of these red and these blue nodes. These are Congress people, American Congress people. And in 1951, you can see it was truly like one country. There was voting across the aisle on absolutely everything. By 2011, it's like cell mitosis occurred there. This now it's one country, two nations. And over the last, 15 years since then, there's been a great digital divorce as well. Red and blue America don't even live in the same places in the cloud. Um, so like blue America has gone off to blue sky and various other places like that. Red America has truth. There are meeting places, but in terms of who follows who, it's so segregated that even if you're on the public square like X or YouTube or whatever, the content that somebody's being exposed to is basically 100% tribal. And unless you've made a very concerted effort to break out of that, um, and that is a hard thing to do. But the interesting thing to grok from this is that in one generation, ideology becomes biology. It's like a Sunni Shiite situation. So red and blue America don't marry each other anymore. They hire each other not so frequently either. And so you've got this real division that is not just uh like it's not imagined. It's not this is like an actuality that we can measure on a variety of different points. So then the other interesting fork that's happening right now is between, call it the centralized state and its currency, and the decentralized world and its currency. And so if you were to look at like the West, and this is interesting for the classical academies, it's kind of rooted in this, we could look at like this sort of long code base where we looked at like Greek thought and philosophy, the Roman state architecture, the British parliamentary architecture, and then the United States constitutional republic democracy experiment. And so there's kind of a continuation there that you could look at on like the software side of cultural thought for the West. And as American empire begins to split and its sort of hardware power is clearly being taken over by China, this a centralized state that has is just far and away number one in manufacturing, resources, military. It owns all of the supply chain. So even if there's American cope to think that in a skirmish that we would have a chance against China, you just can't until you actually own your own supply chain. And we don't right now. And so you can't fight against your own supply chain. And so where the Western sort of values code base goes is to the decentralized internet. And we know that we can create internet companies after the internet went became the World Wide Web in the 90s, and internet companies started to become a thing and disrupt um, legacy institutions. And then we've now seen that you can create internet currencies that are becoming, sucking up fiat into them. And if you measure anything against Bitcoin, it's all kind of down and to the right. And then what's the next big thing? Well, it's internet like communities. It's internet, even potentially internet countries. So this to me is like my main thinking about the four factions that are kind of at war with each other in our time and place right now and vying for like supremacy on the global stage. We have Red America, Blue America, the free decentralized internet, and um, and then China. And all of these have attack vectors against each other. So you could clearly see them out, right? So like red against blue is Trump, blue against red is woke, blue against the internet is the techlash, internet against blue is, you know, the disruption of their legacy institutions and media and academia with internet first domains, social and like that. Red against, or like China against red was the hollowing out of the industrial base in America. Uh, red against China is tariffs and so on. So you can like see these attack vectors at play, and you can know the pieces on the board. And I think if you know that, those are like the four big things at play. Now, India is also like a wild card here that's also very important and will continue to be very important and even become more and more important going forward. It may, for example, as the state become the new like center of real like democracy in the world. Will be interesting to see. But the Indian diaspora, like Indians themselves, are now the largest um, internet speaking cohort or English speaking cohort on the entire World Wide Web on the internet. And they're very smart and they're very hardworking and they are very like spread out across the world. And there's lots of them. So I think that's also a very important force. It just it's they're not like vying for one of these positions in the global stage in the same way right now. But this helps me just kind of know what are the four pieces, and then any like hot topic thing, you can almost kind of depoliticize because you can just look at like, okay, whatever the topic is, I don't need to like pick a side. I can just tell you what all four domains would say about it because I know who the four domains are. And it's all just noise after that. It's not none of it's gonna like hold or be long-term signal. These are all just like tribal signals. So then comes to the idea of, well, what do we do in this new opportunity where we're existing in a time where grounding is not really to be had. We're in a time of flux on multiple domains. We looked at it like we're at a time in terms of our local fourth turning of the West at a generational cycle in the winter. We're at changing world orders through these empire cycles, and we're at changes like mass influence on mass human consciousness from material to electrical. And that's electrical not just in terms of power plants that need generation and AI that runs off it. It's more fundamental understanding that humans are an electrical network. And that's part of this understanding that unfolds, that we're not so separate as we seem. And so we also watch these leviathans changing. Like, what's the most powerful thing? What's the most powerful force? And traditionalists will say it's God, or at least a concept of God. And then, you know, moderns and postmodernists still, mainly like postmodernists, kind of still worship the state, like GOV is the most powerful thing. But then there's this other emergent most powerful thing that's disrupting the last most powerful thing, and that's the network. So networks are emerging as a powerful counterforce to the centralized state. And so within that, I have had this desire. I'm like very organized. I like to organize all of the things in my life. And so the concept is, well, what if we could deeply organize individuals and networks? What if we could start to limit wasted human potential as our North Star and do that by lighting up the connections within this whole human electrical web so that the right people were connecting, the right networks were connecting, the right opportunities were happening, and so on. And so to kind of map that out, I best like Ken Wilber's integral theory, which uses four quadrants at its core. There's a lot of other elements to it as well. But four quadrants is a great starting point to make sure, any discussion, oftentimes if I'll hear an argument happening, it's just because one person is emphasizing one of these quadrants and another is emphasizing a different quadrant. Both have validity, but they're trying to like collapse it all to this is the most important versus this is. So every topic and every individual and like that has an individual and a collective element to it, an interior and an exterior. And so it gives us four quadrants, where the individual interior is the subjective domain, the I space, your thoughts, emotions, memories, states of mind, worldview, perceptions, all that. Then your exterior of the individual, the object space, that's your actual material body and all the things that you can do and your skills and abilities, all of the things that could be measured about you. Then there's a collective interior, that's the intersubjective, that's all of the shared cultural domain, values, meanings, language. And then there's the shared exterior, the collective exterior, that's interobjective, that's all of our systems, our government, our laws, our technology, our networks and our environment and so on. So I like this as a very like comprehensive way to index people and networks and see something in its totality rather than just a piece of it. And if we were to look at wasted human potential, you could map it to each of these quadrants and you could say that each of these would be a very different type of wasted human potential. And restoring it would look really different. So if we're up in the upper left, we would have something like, a loss of wonder, a fear of failure, dependency on external validation, chronic distraction, low agency. Those would all be examples of wasted human potential. Where restoration in that quadrant would mean reflection, purpose discovery, psychological integration, and so on. Versus in the upper right, an individual's exterior, their skills, their output. This is like wasted human potential. Measuring it there is like untrained talent, poor execution habits, health neglect, and so on. Restoring it looks like positive feedback loops, scaffolding, health and energy optimization, and so on. So it's kind of a big text wall. If you're looking at the recording, you can kind of pause it and do a deep dive on it. But I want to just show, okay, great. Now that we can look at all four domains, we can also see wasted human potential in four different defined areas and what restoring it in each of the areas would look like. So now as we start to, if you're in education, then your mind is probably starting to transition into, okay, great. How does this apply to how we're like looking at our kids, looking at our faculty, looking at our school overall as a network? Where's the wasted human potential? How do we begin to like think and operate this way? And this was just kind of quantifying it and showing units that we could use to measure each of these areas. Rough formula as we expanded it to this integral lens. And then if you put like economics into it, economics would look different too. This would be more of on the exterior side of putting like dollars spent in on some initiative. And then what was the output that came from this individual? How would their lifetime earnings go up or the tax rate? Like that would be a way to look at it. But you could say, okay, well, obviously on the interior, it's going to look very different. We're like, in this case, injecting thought architecture and what's the cultural development we're getting back out of that. So that becomes really interesting when you try to say, how do you measure that across a network? But this gives us a cool starting place where we can at least say, okay, we're going to spend $1,000, bucks per kid or whatever. And we're going to deploy that across X number of students. And then here's the wasted human potential that we think we can recover in those exterior domains. So you could get a calculation on that, like an ROI. But this is just an example, like this is a made up AI image of a sample student and just saying, okay, without, on like an unassisted trajectory, a path A, Amari gets fragmented education, disconnected networks. But then if we could bring her into an ecosystem where she was properly indexed and properly connected with the right networks and individuals and mentors and the rest of that, what would that look like for her in terms of a shift? How did her inner life, behavior, culture, and systems improve? And so some people might be familiar with ikigai. It's a concept out of Japan, and it doesn't reflect the totality of COMPART, but it does hit on some of the essences of what we should be going for with education, which is let's find out at an early an age as possible and in as dynamic a way as possible. In other words, constantly growing and changing. Hey, who is the person in front of me? What does this person love? What are they good at? And then we should also be indexing like jobs and skills data and the problems in the world that are not yet addressed to determine what does the world need. And then we should match these things up more effectively. So we should help people develop along the lines of what they're good at and what they love with what the world actually needs so that they're actually paid really well. And so we continue to unlock opportunities based on who people are. And so obviously like the structure of education that would best meet that needs to go under some real changes. But if you start with that thought process at the beginning of our North Star is let's limit wasted human potential, and we're going to have our best shot at that through deep indexing of individuals and then also resources and networks and the rest that they can connect to, then that's like the operating thesis of how we start to unlock our best new designs and ideas and school structures and the rest. But this obviously ends up extending beyond school, but education, as we saw with those empire cycles, it's like education innovation. That's what drives an entire society up. And then the breakdown of that is what shows it going down. And my X feed is just filled with showing all of the places where education institutions are just breaking down and they've been down and to the right. And so understandably, all of these things are happening together. Polarity is dividing, income inequality, irresponsible spending and debt, like all of that, it's all following, the same arc dynamic that we would expect. So Compart is this platform that I've been building and I'm going to show off to you here. And we're essentially indexing and then creating these matching modes. So individual to individual will be for like one-on-one hires or mentor pairing and relationship building. Individuals to networks would be for like careers or education pathways or finding the right community or volunteer opportunities. And then network to network would really be your alliances, your vendor connections, your partnerships, and so on, your association relationships, all of that. Um, we've got a crypto layer now that crypto is back on the table and being green lit. Maybe even by the end of the year, we're going to have full regulatory clarity through the Clarity Bill. So we get to build fun things with magic internet money again and not be worried about if Gary Gensler is going to put us in jail. So that's cool. And so this is like a dual token economy where comp is generated through engagement and completing tasks and like that and earned that way and then spent by asking other people to do things. And part is a governance token that increases the trust in that individual or that network and their voice to determine the direction of priorities on the platform. So I think that's enough. Why am I going to Singapore and hanging out at the Network School with Balaji? Because he's been one of the big thought leaders on this around what comes next, internet communities. He wrote a book called The Network State, and he started to show how um, he was seeing these trends. So he's a very good forecaster of trends, and he has an incredible track record of success of calling things in the past and watching them unfold. But the core concept is what comes after internet companies, internet currencies. Well, it's like internet communities, cities, and even countries. Things that start with highly aligned online like networks that then are capable of collective action which COMPART helps with the collective action piece, and also finding the networks that are like the best fit for individuals. And then they're capable of collective action, and then they eventually use that collective action to crowdfund territory around the world. And then they move part-time or a full-time with their actual feet to their networks, like in real life. So it's like communities that start in the cloud and then descend to the land. And eventually, we think, can earn diplomatic recognition as actual full decentralized countries. So I'm going to be hanging out here. This is in the special Johor economic zone outside of Singapore, technically in Malaysia. And it's been attracting all sorts of people that are working on ideas around this, sharing talent, resources, ideas, investment, and building this kind of stuff. And there is a big roster, like a big dashboard of communities that are at various stages of development, some that are already deeply into, we could call network archipelago space. Um, because, most countries are actually pretty small. They're not like huge empires like America. And so it's possible to start new countries. And now we're saying it's like practical and profitable. It's kind of an answer to tribalism. It's an answer to long united must divide. Great, divide and run your experiment and see how it goes. And let's run a lot of these. And just like startup companies, you run a lot of experiments and some of them succeed. We expect that to happen with these startup communities as well. So that's like the big picture thinking around all of this. And then I will show off now COMPART. And I'll move my cat. And then let's talk about it a little bit. So here's COMPART on the front end, limiting wasted human potential. What was it? It's a digital nervous system for a decentralized world. It deeply indexes individuals and networks to make connections through alignment and resonance instead of just geography and compulsion, right? That's what we're trading it in for. And then, so it's an AI-powered matchmaker for civilization, and it builds integral profiles, does smart matching, creates a reputation meter based on what other people's perceptions and evaluations of you as well. We've mapped an entire ontology of human knowledge into it as well. So we can say, what do people know and not know in different categories and quadrants? So as an individual, you can then see like, oh, where are the domains like I'm smart in and aware of, and where are the parts I'm just like totally offline about, like I don't understand or get at all. And then we have our ask and task marketplace, where you earn and burn the token there. So born from convergence, this is really just going through kind of the arc and fork big energies that I see and cycles that I see affecting us right now, and then the dual token system and the community fund, how we sustain this. So we'll go here and launch the app. And so as a user, I could come in here and I would see, first of all, some tasks right away to get oriented there and start earning some comp. And then I can also, if I'm an admin, if I have root control over the domain for a network, then I can create a network and be the admin owner for it. So if I'm R&B, I've got a similar setup here. So we can imagine, okay, what if this was a school, and maybe it had sub networks, which were departments. Maybe those had sub networks that were like, classes or something. A lot of interesting ways that you could then create asks and tasks and also get an overall picture, like a synthesis statement of a whole chunk of a network, and look at, like, based on all the people in there, we could tell what's the sort of cultural dominance that describes that group of people. How do they think? What are they good at? What are they not good at? So you could see strengths and weaknesses across a network. So it gives us kind of like a way to view ourselves as an individual as well as the networks we're a part of. And then it gives us a way to then map that resonance and that connection with others and find building opportunities, not just along a single line of connection, but multiple lines of connections and alignment. So, the profile has some key areas in here. The way, obviously, that you populate this is through connecting in different data sources, and that's how you're earning also token rewards for connecting in data. It's kind of showing the platform one that you're a real person, and then it's fleshing out the person that you are. So we have AI then that will gather insights from that data, and based on how many insights it can get from the data will affect the rewards. So obviously, like places like LinkedIn would be there. But I was talking with like one of our superintendents at RAPSA, and we were getting excited about like, oh, this is a way that schools could pay their students without paying their students. Because students could be uploading report cards and showing like proof of knowledge in different areas and building out their knowledge map and getting a view of themselves. It could be lighting up. Education paths, it could be especially good for them based on their interest and aptitudes and so on. And then the knowledge map is organized by those same four quadrants. So consciousness and meaning, science and technology, culture and communication systems and structures, subcategories in each of those areas, and then topics in each one. So we can really start to get a sense of what's everything that this person has some exposure to, what level of knowledge, and then where areas where they're, underdeveloped. And for them too, they could see like, oh, I don't want to be that underdeveloped in culture and communication. Let me learn some more stuff here. And then the integral profile is just to use AI to then make a synthesis statement about the person and about them in each of those domains. So this is very loose right now. The marketplace is where you're finding asks that people have targeted either to you or to your network or like that are like a good fit for you, and you can accept them and then complete them to earn that currency. And you've got either marketplace tasks or like reputation related ones. Discovery is where we would then be able to kind of give it any goal that we're currently focused on, and then it would match make us to the best individuals either across the platform or within specific networks or networks that we should be connecting to help achieve like reach that goal. Our governance engine, which is where we use the part, and we've got 4 seasons: spring for proposals, summer for voting, fall for aggregating and digesting, and winter for implementation. And then obviously our wallets here, our messaging, and then let me just show you as a network something cool as well. Or here, this is kind of cool. If I click on any network, I can also see an aggregate of how many members are there and the total like part or weight this network has spread out across the globe. Not with the individuals' names, but just how many people are there and where are they and how distributed are they and so on. And then in a network to network connection, I can also see the relationship between this network and all of its other networks. So if it's like TCA, you could show then all of your vendor connections, all of your association connections, all of your partner connections, all of your affiliate connections, and so on, all of your subsidiary connections of the different schools, and end up with a big visualization of those connections. And then you can also search other networks by domain and add those there. So that is kind of the big picture overall. And we can spend as much time as we want. We've just got 5 minutes to the end of the hour, but I don't have a next thing. So since I've got a hobby and Johnny, yeah, impressions, thoughts, questions,
Go ahead,
inspirations.
I really like the explanation of the cycles going from like a really, really macro to a micro. The ability to think that way. I'm just reflecting on that piece, right? To think in that manner and in which phase we're in. And a little bit of that relates a little bit into maybe even our organization in some of those phases. The ability to connect I think is pretty interesting. Definitely, yeah, definitely thinking of like the ability to connect and to find a way in which this ecosystem is connected right through AI, I think is pretty interesting too. So yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jacob, as you know, I'm a guru in finding out what kids can do, what they want to do, where they know they want where they want to be headed, or they don't even know where they want to be headed. But the indexing piece of this is brilliant, and it dives deeper than I've ever imagined. On a spectrum that I wasn't even familiar with. I appreciate that. Um, just the whole indexing piece for education piece. So that's a word of the past. The whole indexing to find and figure out where students are at helps educators so much to then have a kid be motivated, or a student be motivated and move forward and have some sort of progress, instead of that that pit of learned helplessness, because they really don't know where, they're being taught sixth grade math, but they're still in the first grade section or whatever. That's that basic stuff. I think this is brilliant, and the incentive system moving into the digital world, another home run for you. Um, because that's really where it's headed, and kids know more about that than we do. They really do. So I'm
Yeah,
looking
it's
forward
interesting.
to.
I've always been for really experimenting with letting kids earn at a much younger age. I think you understand how special education zones where we like get rid of like child labor laws and stuff and just let them actually like build and contribute to cool stuff even in elementary school. But that's anyway. So the idea though is there's going to be all sorts of other great apps and tools and solutions out there. Compart is not meant to compete with any of those, do what any of those are doing. It's meant to absorb and aggregate from all of them so they can build as deep a profile as possible
Right.
around individuals, and then also like really protect that data so that it's not ripped off and just like sold to advertisers and then just blasted. But that if and if there's a connection to be made there, it's so strategic, there's so much intent that I can afford to just pay you directly to engage in that connection and
Right.
do the thing or whatever. And that when you go to your marketplace, like anything that's there is like very curated to who you are, or it's from one of your existing, networks asking for something in that domain already.
Brilliant.
And so this is not a competition with all the other great ideas and stuff happening out there. It's a way to just like aggregate and pull them all in to depth of index for an individual, depth of index for a network, and then all those connections.
You talk about competition. I think that's where people within our AI space and are trying to develop things to uh, competi competition is going to breed nothing but negativity. We have this is another thing that can be collaborated and partnered on with everybody, and everybody's going to have some sort of expertise or something to provide the market of education. This is brilliant because this I look at PBIS in the schools right now. All these little token, whatever, you earn a dollar or whatever. It's so subjective. This really takes a look at the whole child. Let's just say it, the whole child, and then it rewards that. The way I'm looking at it is it rewards that whole child in a new age way. That where we're headed. Well done, buddy. Well done.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly. So
proud of you.
they could go out there and take a class or complete something with TCA, and they're like, great. Now let me add it back into my Compart index where I'm going to get rewards and also deepen my profile. So you kind of get the intrinsic reward of now I've got a more updated, complete view, like mirror of myself. And then,
Portfolio of self-actualization at the
yeah,
top.
something
You
like
know,
that. Something like that. Yeah, exactly. Or
absolutely.
across all four quadrants. And so each quadrant would maybe have a different term for what it's a portfolio of, but yeah. So yeah, this kind of took me over. I was at like a CCAP conference, maybe a year and a half ago, also down in Irvine actually, and I started just kind of reflecting on this. And then vibe coding came about. It was like, okay, great. I can now think about it, write about it, and build about it simultaneously. And so we'll kind of test this internally, and the goal is to have this available for other networks that want to onboard and do some internal testing. Obviously, that will also give people early access to the token mechanics as well. And that'll be cool. And then sometime, hopefully in like spring, first quarter of next year, when we've got a lot the bugs and the token mechanisms really figured out, we'll create a liquidity pool and actually launch an ERC20. And then it will actually have like a real world value to it, and it will build an actual economy, and it'll be like a living decentralized thing.
So I haven't showed you, and not today, but I haven't showed you our student portals yet. And in the elementary student portal, it's when a task or a goal has been met, I've got aligned with these organizations where the kids can get on, and through Amazon they're sent a reward, okay, a material thing. This is so much better. This is so much better, and it takes us into the future. It lessens the amount of exhaust coming out of those doggone cars and everything else. But this is brilliant, man. I'd love to see how we can integrate that in everything, especially in that
Yeah,
portion where
you would
kids
you
are.
have a platform like yours, and it would either be that they could, screen capture or do some sort of export and then an import, or we'll have some number of partners that we have direct API connections that are just constantly syncing. So as it updates over here,
Exactly.
it's updating within COMPART, and they're earning rewards. So it'll be a blend of both, because we want to be able to people to use just about anything in their life to further deepen their index. But then, other platforms and apps should build partnerships over time where it's like a direct connect, and just keeping their profile up to date as changes happen across the board.
Thank you very much. I have another meeting to jump to, but this was super helpful context. Yeah, I'll definitely reach out. Thank you very much. Johnny, it was nice meeting you.
Nice seeing you, buddy. I'm about an hour and a half away from you, so if you need
Okay,
something, let me know. Okay.
sounds good. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
Stay on,
Yeah, thanks,
Jacob.
gang. I'll go ahead and stop recording here now, and I'll see you soon, Javi, and talk to you,
Yeah,
Johnny.
thank you.
Jacob, brilliant, brilliant. The superintendent